In what feels like an impossibly quick time compared to the construction of the forward superstructure, today I'm going to be finishing off the bases of the funnels. The majority of what I need to do is scratch build some custom components. I'm once again following the advice of the HMS Hood Association in what I'm building. In addition to the scratch build components, I'll also be installing some photo etch and searchlights. I'm going to start by building the structure that goes on top of the engine room vent at the base of the forward funnel. The structures are different on the port and starboard sides of the ship. On the port side of the ship, it's a solid structure, and on the starboard side of the ship, it's an open structure. For both of these structures, the dimensions are going to be roughly the same. The only difference is that the port side structure, the solid structure, has a bit that juts out of the side of it, which is used to mount a carley float. Other than that, the basic dimensions will be the same. To build this structure, I used 0.48mm and 2mm styrene stock. The starting point is just a simple rectangular box. I glue the sides together using Revell Contactor Professional, and I place it on the chopper to just help square up the sides a bit, and then set it aside to dry. Once the sides have sufficiently dried, I cut off a section of styrene stock and glue it to the top. To give this component a bit more strength, I fill it with extra thick superglue and leave it to set. Once set, I apply plastic cement to all the edges to help fill those gaps, and then sand it smooth. After removing all of the excess putty and making sure that I'm happy with the state of the core of this structure, I need to install the bit that sticks out of the side where the carley float will be mounted. Once again, I use 4.8mm styrene stock, and this time I just need to use two of those sections stacked on top of each other to make it stick out by 1mm. Half a millimeter wasn't deep enough. Since the roof of the structure is installed on top of the 4.8mm stock, I also need to put a small strip of plastic on top of this section that sticks out. After carefully positioning it centered, I then glue it down using extra thin plastic cement and install the section that goes on top of it to bring the entire top of the component to the same height. Surfacer is then applied to the surface of the component to ensure that all the gaps are filled, and after it has dried, the component is filed and sanded smooth. Next, I build the structure that goes on the starboard side of the ship. This is the open structure. To build this structure, I once again use 4.8mm styrene stock that was cut to the same length as the structure on the port side, and on top of it I glue a section of 3.2mm styrene stock. Down the side of the structure there are 5 support pillars. These I construct out of 0.5 by 0.25mm styrene stock, where I place the thin edge pointing outwards so that they look as thin as possible and more to scale. To ensure that the support pillars are evenly spaced and in the correct position, I mark their position on a piece of tape and use that as a guide to assist me when placing them onto the component. To glue the pillars in place, I dip the end in Revell Contactor Professional and then carefully place it onto the component. Once all the components are placed, I reinforce the bond with extra thin plastic cement. That deals with the construction of the components for the forward base. Now to build the structures that go on the aft base. These are considerably simpler. They're effectively very large open storage bins. They are considerably lower than the structures that go on the forward funnel's base, so I built these out of 2mm styrene stock. These structures are identical on both the port and starboard side of the ships, so I just cut out sections of 2mm styrene stock and then glue them together using Revell Contactor Professional. After the glue has dried, everything can then be painted. These structures will be painted in XF53, the color that I'm using for Hood's superstructure. All of these structures, although I'm not sure about the forward base's port structure, are used for the storage of wood. I think this wood is used when painting the ship. They hoist it up and sit on them and stand on them to access the higher parts of the ship. When they're not painting, they seem to put all this wood in these storage bins. Perhaps there are other uses for them. But the point is that these storage bins are often full of wood, and they're very messy, especially the ones that go on the aft funnel. This means that I need to make some wooden planks to put in these storage bins. To represent the wooden planks, I'm using 0.5 and 1mm styrene stock that I've roughly cut to the same length. I intentionally cut these planks very roughly. If you look at the photos of this area of the ship, you can see that this wood was not necessarily the nicest wood in the best condition. It's very rough. the angles aren't all straight, not everything's the same length, and they've kind of just been dumped there. So I don't want it to look overly ordered. To create that effect, I'm just cutting these pieces of plastic rather randomly, but roughly to the same length, and then painting them in the same color that I used to paint the deck, which is XF78. Once the paint has dried on all of the components, installation can begin. Starting with the forward base, I glue the components down using extra thin super glue. The roof of these vents is photo etch. In an earlier video you would have seen that I replaced them with photo etch, and plastic cement won't bond to photo etch, so I have to use super glue. For the port component, I don't need the funnel base to be installed. I did make sure that this component would fit with this bit for the cardi float sitting right on the edge of this vent's roof. For the wood storage structure that goes on the starboard side, I have to be a bit more careful, so I replaced the funnel and then use that as the indicator to ensure that the component sits butted up right against the funnel's base, but doesn't encroach into the space where the funnel's base needs to be. Once I'm happy with its position, I glue it down using extra thin super glue. The support pillars on the front of this component are quite delicate, so I do want to glue them down as well. That also gives me an opportunity to make sure that they are standing vertically and properly positioned. One by one, I use tweezers to adjust the position of the pillars. Once I have them in the place that I think is correct, I glue them down using more extra thin super glue. The last thing that I need to do is add in some wooden planks. For the starboard structure, I select 3 short planks and neatly insert them in a stack. For whatever reason, they did seem to treat the wood stored in this forward storage bin, this covered one, a bit more carefully. And you can see in the photos they were neatly stacked in there. Once I'm happy with the position of the planks, I glue them down using extra thin plastic cement. Essentially, the glue will glue the planks to each other and to the forward pillars. The last thing to do to complete the details on the forward funnel base is to install the cardi floats. One cardi float sits on the side of the fully enclosed structure, and another cardi float sits on top of the roof of the partially enclosed structure. Fortunately, I do have enough cardi floats. If you remember quite a long way back now, you'll know that I saved 2 cardi floats on the side of the forward superstructure. They were incorrectly positioned and there were too many of them. So those 2 cardi floats will be used here on this forward funnel base that didn't come with any provision in the base kit for cardi floats. With the installation of these cardi floats, the forward funnel's base is complete. Moving on to the aft base, I'll install the large open wood storage bins. These storage bins, I've left the bottom open so they can have a bit more depth, and they're going to be installed on top of a plastic roof. Therefore, they can be glued down with extra thin plastic cement. Once again, to ensure that they don't obstruct the base of the funnel, I place the funnel down first and then push them so they butt up right against the base. Once glued down, I then fill them quite randomly with sections of wood planks. I intentionally want it to look a bit messy. Once I'm happy with the general arrangement, I glue the planks down using extra thin plastic cement. Now to deal with some details. A small detail that is mentioned in the guide from the HMS Hood Association is that the 3 windows in the back of the Motorboat workshop were often covered by canvas. So I am going to do that. I'm going to create some kind of canvas proxy and install it in the window to make it look like they are being covered by canvas. For this material, I want something that has a bit of a texture, and tissue paper, in this case this is paper towel, can provide that texture. The paper towel that I have sitting in the kitchen has a pattern on it, little flower patterns and the like. Obviously I want that removed. To remove the pattern, I flood the paper towel with water and then press it down and fold it over until I get a thicker sheet of wet paper towel. Obviously paper towel is not the stiffest material, so I need to do something to stiffen it into more of a card. That can be achieved using white glue or wood glue. You don't need a lot of wood glue to stiffen the paper towel. Having it quite thin makes it easier to paint it on or simply submerge the paper towel in that solution. So I thin it quite a lot with water and then place the paper towel into the solution. The paper towel is then removed and left to dry overnight. And in the morning, you're left with a piece of paper like this, which is actually quite stiff. As for the color that I'm using, well, I've changed my mind on that a few times. First, I painted in XF53, but I decided against going forward with that because I wanted to look a little bit different to the surrounding paint. So I then painted it in deck tan, not wooden deck tan. Wooden deck tan is what I used on the deck. This is a more muted version of that, but it does have a tan, as the name suggests, appearance to it. But when I installed that, I didn't like it because it looked too brown. It looked too much like wood of some variety. So I then painted it in medium gray, XF20. XF20 is a lighter gray than the color of the superstructure, so it does stand out, but not so much that it really catches your eye. I think it's a good compromise. Anyway, after cutting this canvas to size, I place it into the windows and glue it down using extra thin superglue. Now to move on to the photo etch, starting with the handrails. Once again, I am going to backtrack and change this, that you'll see it at the end of the video. This section of railing goes on the back of the MFDF platform. I initially made it this shape because I couldn't route it past the cardi floats. In the end, I removed the cardi floats and do it properly, but I didn't refilm it because the installation is exactly the same. Fold a piece of photo etch hand railing, apply extra thick superglue to the base of the handrail, put it in place on the model, then reinforce the entire length of the rail using extra thin superglue, which will also fill gaps and help blend that lower rail into the side of the superstructure. On the front of this platform, there is also a rail, but this rail only goes between the two ladders. So this is just a simple short piece of straight rail, once again installed using the same method as for this longer rail that goes on the aft of the MFDF structure. The next detail to go on to this area of the ship are the searchlights. I'm still getting used to working with MicroMaster parts. They feel like cheating. Normally I'd have to construct the searchlight and add bits of detail to it, and it would take a whole lot of time and you'd get something that wouldn't look as good as this. With MicroMaster, you just have to pull it off its base and paint it. After removing the searchlights from their base, I then paint it and the davits that just go inboard from them in XF53. For the davits, there is a little bit of extra detail that needs to be dealt with. The cables, I don't want them to be XF53, I want them to be black, so I carefully paint those in black. Initially, I painted the intersection of the light in aluminium. I wanted to have a silvery effect, but after looking at more photos of these searchlights, I realized that when they're off, it actually looks like they're black on the inside. Obviously, they're shadows and the light doesn't get in there, so I thought it'd be better to represent that effect using black paint. That's why you see me here painting over the silver paint with black. Now that all the components are painted, they can be installed. Starting with the searchlights, I place a small drop of extra thick super glue into the hole and then place the searchlight on top of that glue. Extra thick super glue does give you a bit of time to work before it fully sets, so I use that time to carefully position the searchlights. After the searchlights, I install the davits. Here I place a small drop of extra thick super glue on the base of the davit and then put it in contact with the deck. There's one more detail to note, and that is the deck color around the searchlights and the MFDF spreader. I repainted that in XF79, linoleum deck brown. If you read the HMS Hood Association's painting guide, you'll find out there's quite a lot of uncertainty about the deck color in this area of the ship. They basically give you a choice between dark gray or reddish brown. And since reddish brown will be more visually interesting, I have decided to repaint it in reddish brown. That completes the construction of the aft funnel base. So in the next video, I'll be moving on to the smaller structures that sit on the shelter deck. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.